So my older brother, who was 20 years old, says, well, I'm going down to the bar. I'm 17. I said to him, can I come with you? He says, sure, I don't care. My 15-year-old brother, he said, can I go? My brother says, sure. So then my older brother, the 20-year-old, takes my dad's car. We get in his car. My 20-year-old, myself 17, my 15-year-old brother, he takes us down to the pub. We go down to the Norlander Hotel right here on Pembina Highway. My brother was a regular there. He knew the bouncer. Somehow or another, he got us in. I mean, when I was 17 years old, I looked 12, honestly. That's why today I look 25, which is great.
Welcome to Church of the Rock from Winnipeg. Stay tuned to this week's thought-provoking message from Pastor Mark Hughes.
Well, this morning my message is entitled, The Worst Day of Your Life. Now, I'm hoping this doesn't become the worst day of your life, but depending on how this message turns out, who knows, right? Could end up going that way. You know, when it comes to bad days, I think there's kind of three kinds of bad days. We have bad days, really bad days, and the worst day of your life. And that expression, the worst day of your life, it actually gets used too much, right? I don't know how many of you have ever saw the Simpsons movie, and in it we find Bart in a very awkward predicament that I won't go into, and he says to his dad, he says, this is the worst day of my life. And Homer corrects him and says, no, this is the worst day of your life so far. And I think that's really apt, because what child really knows anything about the worst day of your life, right? I mean, when it comes to the worst day of your life, teenagers use that expression all the time, particularly teenage girls, right? Every second day is the worst day of my life. You're ruining my life. Usually it has something to do with their parents being humiliating and embarrassing to even be with. When my girls were 12, my son's been okay, but when my girls were 12, they started pretending that they weren't related to me. And I'm not sure why. And that continued from the time they were 12 right up until, well, to this present day. And they're both in their 20s. What we're going to do this morning is we're going to look at the worst day of King David's life, or at least the worst day so far. And what we're going to do is we're going to learn something about how to deal with our bad days, our really bad days, and the worst day of our life. So we're going to start in verse 1, Samuel chapter 30, and this is what it says. Now it happened when David and his men came to Ziklag on the third day that the Amalekites had invaded the south and Ziklag, attacked Ziklag, and burned it with fire, and had taken captive the women and those who were there, both small and great, and did not kill them, but carried them away and went their way. So David and his men came to the city, and there it was, burned with fire, and their wives, their sons, and their daughters had been taken captive. Then David and the people who were with him lifted up their voices and wept until they had no more power to weep. I don't know about you, but I find this story just a touch amusing, even though it's a sad story. I mean, I realize their city's been burned and the wives and the kids are gone, but here's these rough and tumble men, these soldiers who are out doing battle, and when they come home and they see their wives and children gone, it says they weep until they had no more power to weep. They just weep themselves exhausted. This was easily, I would say, and you probably agree, as far as this group of men, there were 600 of them with David, this was probably the worst day of their life. I need to give you a little bit of history to this story because we need to understand the context. Here was the story. We have David and his 600 soldiers and their wives and their kids. We have them exiled. They're living in exile from Israel because King David's father, who was King Saul, which actually not father-in-law, wanted to kill him. So he had to leave Israel, which he did. Usually most people's worst day of their life has something to do with their in-laws. That's what I learned from this story. So anyway, David's in exile, and so he goes into the land of the Philistines. And catch this, he makes an allegiance with Achish. Achish is the king of the Philistines, and he agrees to fight with the Philistines against Israel and against King Saul. And as part of the deal, he gives them a place to live, and he gives them the city of Ziklag. Ziklag is a Philistine city, and he gives it to David, and David and his family are living in the city. So David goes out with his soldiers, leaving all the women and children at home in Ziklag. He goes out to do battle, and while he's out fighting on behalf of the Philistines, another group, the Amalekites, attack the south, attack the city of Ziklag. They burn it with fire, and they take all of the women and all of the children captive, and they're gone. So when David and his men return, their wives and their children are gone, and their city is destroyed. Now, at this point, they don't know what's happened to their wives and their children. Their wives could have been raped. Their wives could have been murdered. Their kids could have been killed. They don't know this at this point. And so what they do is they weep and they weep and they weep until they have no more power to weep. Because that's what you do on the worst day of your life, right? You cry. Even grown men cry. I think that's what this story, at least in part, tells us. But I want you to think about this for a moment. Because sometimes what we call the worst day of our life isn't the worst day at all. Because a lot of times our worst days have to do with things like money or our house or our car. You know what? If you went broke, that's still not the worst day of your life. If you, had a car crash and you lost your car, if you had a lawsuit, if you, lost your job or lost a promotion, those are all bad days. I'm not going to argue with that. But those are not the worst days of your life. Because the worst day of your life, and some of you in this room have already had your worst day of your life, so you know what I'm talking about, always has to do with your family. It always has to do with the people that you love, the people that you love the most. It has to do with a calamity or a tragedy or a death in the family. And all the other stuff doesn't matter. Who really cares about cars and houses and money and possessions? All those things can be replaced, even your reputation. But when we lose loved ones in our life, that's the worst day in our life. And that's what's going on in this story. They have lost their wives and their children, all 600 of them. And they're just crying and weeping till they have no more power to weep. And the day was doubly bad for David. You know that, don't you? Do you know why? If you read the next verse, it says that actually they had taken both his wives, right? Twice as bad, right? You know what the penalty for bigamy is in Canada today? 2 wives. That's what it is. And so, sorry ladies, I couldn't resist. It's funny though. So we have David. Matters get worse, actually, because what happens next is the men look at David and give thought to stoning him. You know what the moral of this story is? No day is so bad that it can't get worse, right? So, in a moment, we're going to look at how David turned this day around. He took the worst day of his life, and he actually caused it to be one of the greatest days of his life and one of the greatest victories. And there's a way and there's a methodology in which we turn our bad days into good days. But before we get there, I want to spend a few minutes at least talking about why he was in such a predicament in the first place. Because he wasn't there by accident. And I'm going to put this absolutely as delicately as I can. David screwed up. You look at this story. He's made a mistake. I'll give you at least 2 things he did wrong. First thing was this, that David was living a compromised life. He was living in the land of the Philistines. He had made an allegiance with the king of his enemies. You remember who the Philistines were. 13 chapters early, we have David killing Goliath, the big warrior of the Philistines. Now he's in an alliance, an allegiance. He's made a deal with the devil. And not only that, he's living in the land of the Pharisees. Or rather the Philistines. He's living in one of their cities. He's made this deal. And he is living a compromised life. David, of all people, should know better. He's read the stories. He knows what happened to Lot when Lot and his wife moved to Sodom. He knew what happened to Samson, who did the same thing, was living in the cities of the Philistines, and he lost his eyes, and he lost his strength, and he lost his life. David, of all people, should know better than to live a compromised life. But there he is, doing it anyway. And when you live a compromised life, you don't just put your own self at risk, you put your whole family at risk, and that's what he had done. You say, what's that got to do with me? I'll tell you what it has to do with you. I see all kinds of people in church. Every Sunday morning they're in church, and the rest of the week they're living like the devil. They're living a compromised life. And they cuss like the world, and they drink like the world, and they lie like the world, and they cheat like the world, and they surf pornography like the world, and they go on and on and on, and all of these compromised things. And then they wonder, why is my life such a mess? Where's God? Why isn't he protecting me? Why isn't the blessings of God moving in my life? Because they have forgotten that they are living a compromised life. And when David lived the compromised life, he put his whole family at risk. And the rest of us do that when we do it. So the first thing is this, is that we find David living in a compromised life situation. But there's a second problem, a second mistake that he made, and it was this. He left his family undefended. He had 600 men, and he took all 600 into battle, and he left his wife and his wives and everybody else's wives and children in a place completely undefended in the devil's backyard, in the Philistines' own community. What, again, was he thinking? And you say, how does that relate to me? Well, once again, when we look at our lives, many of us do that. You know what we do. We go off and earn a living. We go off and do our thing, and men are worse than anybody else because we have our jobs and we have our sports and we have our hobbies. And meanwhile, we're out slaying the dragon or fighting the battles, and we're leaving our families undefended. And we don't realize at how much risk our families are. Look at our children today. They're bombarded. They're inundated with all kinds of temptations on the internet and on their cell phones, and it just comes at them all day long, all day long. And I'm going to be really blunt with you guys. A lot of men are just plain clued out. And a lot of mothers, too. You're not exempt in this. We're just plain clued out about what our kids are into. We don't know what they're doing. We don't know where they're going. We don't know who their friends are. We don't know what they're looking at on the internet. We don't know what they're talking about. We don't know what kinds of things they're in. And sometimes we're oblivious, and we think we're doing our job because we're out, fighting the battles, fighting the good faith. You know where the battle is? The battle's at home. That's the most important battle that you have, and we can't be free from that battle. That is our battle. And David made this huge mistake of leaving his wives and children undefended in this city. When I talk about this, I know what I'm talking about. I grew up with a great father, a great provider, but you know what? He was emotionally detached. He wasn't teaching us values and wasn't in our life and in our face. He rarely knew what we were up to. He had 7 kids, and he went to the office 7 days a week. I think the two are related. I don't think that was an accident. If you had 7 kids, you'd probably go to work every day too. But anyway, it wasn't a good model for fatherhood. And even though I love my father dearly and I'm not criticizing him, he wasn't involved in the lives of his children. And that's a lot of kids to let go in their own way. I'm going to tell you a story tonight that's going to embarrass my father and especially my mother sitting over there, but she doesn't mind as long as I'm talking about her. She's happy. And what happened was she was hosting I was 17 years old, she was hosting a shower. It was either a wedding shower, a baby shower, I don't know. And this is what she said to me, actually all the boys, all the brothers, she said to us, we're having a shower here tonight in the house. I don't care where you go, just leave. Don't ever tell your kids you don't care where they go. That's the first mistake. So she says, I don't care where you go, I just want you to leave and you can't come back till 11 o'clock at night. So my older brother, who was 20 years old, says, well, I'm going down to the bar. I'm 17. I said to him, can I come with you? He says, sure, I don't care. My 15-year-old brother, he said, can I go? My brother says, sure. So then my older brother, the 20-year-old, takes my dad's car. We get in his car. My 20-year-old, myself, 17, my 15-year-old brother, he takes us down to the pub. We go down to the Norlander Hotel right here on Pembina Highway. My brother was a regular there. He knew the bouncer. Somehow or another, he got us in. I mean, when I was 17 years old, I looked 12, honestly. That's why today I look 25, which is great. Now, my younger brother, my 15-year-old brother, he was fine because he looked 45 then. Still looks 45. Always looked the same age. He was born looking 45. All these wrinkles on his face. And so we're sitting there, and of course, I can't believe this is like the best day of my life. I'm in the bar. I look 12. I'm 15 years old, so we ordered all the beer that they would bring. The whole table was full of beer, this whole table full of beer, and I'm just ready to take my first sip, and guess what happens? My father walks into the bar. My dad walks into the bar, my eyes just went like this, and he saw us, and he came towards our table, and I thought, I don't know what's going on here. Maybe, just maybe, my mother has kicked him out too, and he's come to join us. Or perhaps he's coming to kill us, which was a much more likely possibility. And so I was just absolutely incredulous, sitting there, not knowing what was going to happen next. My father walks up to us. Remember, we're 20, 17, and 15 sitting in the bar, and he says, you guys took my car. I need it tonight. Give me the keys. My brother throws him the keys. He turned and walked out of the bar and left his underage kids sitting in the bar. I took that as a validation. So you know what we did? We drank all the beer. There's only one good news part of this story. We did not drink and drive. Right? We had no car. We walked home. Are you not paying attention here? You see, our family is our ministry. Our family is our greatest battle. And if we neglect our family, if we leave them undefended, then we've made a huge mistake. Now, you need to understand something, because I don't want to be condemning you here today. Our bad days are really bad days, and our worst day of our life. Sometimes they happen because we screwed up, but sometimes they happen because somebody else screwed up. And sometimes they happen because stuff happens, right? Isn't that what the bumper sticker says? Is that what it says? Is that correct? Stuff happens? Am I close on that? It's close on that. And the point is this, you know what? It's nobody's fault. Even if it was your fault, you know what? You don't spend the whole time getting upset about whose fault it is. Is it their fault? It doesn't matter. At that point, it doesn't matter. It's like the story of this man. He's on his deathbed, and his wife is sitting by his side. And he says, honey, and his wife leaned in. He says, honey, you've always been by my side. You were by my side when I lost my job. And you were by my side when I went bankrupt. You were by my side when we lost the house. And you were by my side when I was convicted of tax evasion. And you were by my side when my health started to fail. And now that I'm dying, you're still by my side. And then he said, honey, and she leaned and said, what, dear? He said, I think you might be bad luck. That's funny. All right. So we have a couple of reasons why David was in this predicament, but that doesn't really matter. What really matters is this. How did he get out of it? How did he deal with the worst day of his life? And I'm going to give you 3 words. I hope you remember them. And the 3 words are this. They are encourage, inquire, and engage. And if we look at this story, what happens is that in the next verse, or 2 verses down, what it says is that David encouraged himself in the Lord. Now here's my question for you. Why did he encourage himself? There was nobody left to encourage him, right? They wanted to kill him. They wanted to stone him, not encourage him, so he had to encourage himself. And you think, how do you do that? How do you encourage yourself in the Lord? You know what? Go read the Psalms and you'll find out real quick. Have you noticed some of the wording of some of those Psalms? Have you ever noticed how Psalm 103 is written? Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me. Bless the Lord, O my soul. Who's he talking to? Himself. He's talking to himself. He's saying, soul, bless the Lord. Bless the Lord, oh my soul. I've got advice for you. Self, here's my advice. This is what you do. Nobody else likes you. They hate you. They want to kill you. This is my advice to you. I'm listening. My advice to you is bless the Lord. Bless the Lord, oh my soul, and all that is within me. And so David, you read many of these Psalms are actually directed at himself to stir himself up. What he had to do is he had to dig deep. He had to go within the very inner recesses of his heart and find that place where in the midst of his worst day ever, he could find solace in his God. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all of his benefits, who heals all your diseases and forgives all your sicknesses, or rather forgives your sicknesses. I'll get this right. He heals your diseases, forgives your sicknesses, and he delivers your life from destruction. That's what David said. He was in a place where he needed his life delivered from destruction, and he found that place. He found that place where he dug deep and he encouraged himself in the Lord. You know, on the next worst day of his life, do you remember the next worst day of his life? That was the day where his son, the son of Bathsheba, died. For 7 days he'd been praying. For 7 days he'd been fasting, waiting for that son, hoping and praying that son would recover, but that son died. And when he got the news, the servants were afraid that he was going to do something terrible or dangerous. But what did David do? It says he got up and he washed his face and he put on new clothes and he went down to the house of the Lord and he worshiped God. Why? Because he knew he had to encourage himself in the Lord. He had to find that place where he could find God in the midst of struggle and in the midst of pain. And that's what he did. You look 1,000 years later, you see the same thing happen with Paul and Silas. Paul and Silas in Acts chapter 16, they were arrested actually for doing a good deed. They cast the spirit out of the woman with the spirit of divination. They ended up in prison for it. What did they do? Did they weep until they had no more power to weep? No. It says, and at midnight they were awake, singing psalms and hymns, and all of the other prisoners heard them. In that place where they were having a bad day, or maybe it was a really bad day, but nevertheless, what did they do? They pressed into God and they encouraged themselves in the Lord. And what happened in the midst of those praise and in the midst of those hymns is that God showed up and a great earthquake came and the gates of the prison opened up and they were all free. You see, that's what happens when we engage with God. When we find that place, even on your darkest day, you can find a God who's waiting with his arms open to you. So the first thing is to encourage yourself on your worst day of your life. And the second thing you need to do is you need to inquire. And you see, what David did in verse 8 was this. It says, and so David inquired of the Lord. Here's what I've discovered. On your bad days, your really bad days, and on your worst days, you actually don't know what to do. And you're in that place where you don't know where to turn because it probably caught you off guard. And there are people in this room, like I said, that you've already experienced your worst day, the worst day of your life. But for some of you, it's coming. And we will all have the worst day of our life. And when you arrive in that place, and it will have something to do with your family, when you arrive in that place, you will not know what to do. And what you do is you inquire of the Lord like David did. So David prayed, and David inquired and said, I don't know what to do. I'm stuck. I'm hooped. I'm trapped here. I don't know what to do. And God answered. You see, what happens is when you inquire of the Lord, God's going to answer. God's going to come to your rescue. God is going to be there for you because that's what the Bible teaches, that when we pray, God answers. And so he did. He prayed and God answered, and I'll tell you about that in a moment. But first, let me tell you a story about Don Cherry. How many of you know who Don Cherry is? Everybody knows who Don Cherry is. Easily Canada's best dresser, right? Yeah, I mean, look up at the screen there. The guy has got such an incredible taste in clothing that it's just really remarkable. We've got curtains that look like some of these outfits. This is my favorite one. I mean, what's this all about? Must have been St. Patrick's Day. You know what? He doesn't have self-image problems. I'll give him that, right? But here's something most of you don't know about Don Cherry, the voice of Hockey Night in Canada. What you don't know about Don Cherry, unless you read the article in the Free Press, the Winnipeg Free Press, is that he's a devout Christian. And he tells a story about when he was 36 years old. He was 36-year-old, washed-up, minor league, AHL league hockey player. And what had happened was he was done with his career. He was 36 years old. He was a construction worker. He was laid off. And he was lying on his bed feeling sorry for himself because he was done with hockey. He had no job. He had no education. He had no skills. He had no prospects. And he said his mind went to a dark place and he thought about taking his life. But instead what he did was he dropped to his knees by the side of his bed and he said, Lord, what do I do? He was having the worst day of his life. And he said, Lord, what do I do? He inquired of the Lord and God spoke to him and said, go back to hockey. So he thought, all right, he's 36 already. Never ever made it to the NHL, to the majors. But anyway, he goes back, he trains, he loses some 20 pounds of weight and gets back into shape. And the old GM from the Rochester Americans that used to be the team he played on, they hired him back to play hockey. He was all excited. Except they put him on the rookie line. And he's on the rookie line, and that first season, 71-72, he scored a grand total of 1 single goal. But let me tell you what happened. What happened in that year was they lost their coach, and they made Don Cherry their coach. And by the end of that season, the AHL voted him Coach of the Year. He spent 3 years with Rochester, then he got elevated to the NHL, coaching the Boston Bruins and the likes of Bobby Orr rather, and all of the greats. And of course, the rest, I guess, is history, right? We know the story. See, here he was thinking that his career in hockey was over. Turns out it hadn't even begun yet. I mean, the most of his career has been after that point, that definitive point where he found that place where he inquired of God and God spoke to him and he got the answer and he was able to rise up and he was able to move on. We learn to encourage ourselves in the Lord, and then we learn to inquire of the Lord in our place and in our grief. But then the last thing is this, is we need to engage. We need to re-engage life. And so David prays, and he asks this question, and he says, should I pursue the Amalekites? He wasn't just going to go off half-cocked. He needed to know, was this the right thing to do? And the Lord answered him and said, yes, pursue them, and you will recover all. So David mounts, and this time he left 200 people, 200 men in the city, and he took 400. He pursued the Amalekites. He defeated the Amalekites, and this is what it says, and David recovered all, and not one of them was injured. He turned his worst day of his life into his best day of his life. He turned his greatest defeat into his greatest victory because he took those 3 steps to engage with God. Now, I understand what you're thinking. You're saying, but you don't understand, Pastor Mark. Most people's worst day of their life is when they lose someone, that person's not coming back. I understand that. I understand that people, when we lose people in our life, that they're not coming back. But here's the thing that you need to understand. Everybody loses loved ones. Everybody. If you live long enough, you're actually going to lose all of them. Eventually, they're all going to die. People pass away. It's part of life. It's a rite of passage. It's just how life works. And here's what I'm trying to say to you, is you have to learn how to re-engage life. There is life after death. There is life after the worst day of your life. There is life after a bad day, a really bad day, or the worst day. We have got to re-engage life. You cannot stay in that place of grief and misery and sorrow. Do you grieve? Yes, absolutely. That's why you go to that place of encouraging yourself in the Lord. That's why you inquire of Him. But at some point, you have to rise up and you have to re-engage life, because life goes on with you or without you. And out of your pain and out of your sorrow, you have to dig deep and get on with life. That's what this story is all about. Let me close with one final story here this morning, and it's the story of Rick Warren. Rick Warren, many of you would know this name. Of course, he's the pastor of the huge church in California, Saddleback Church. He wrote the best-selling Purpose-Driven Life, something like 35 million copies that he sold. A couple of years ago, or not quite a couple of years ago, I had an opportunity of meeting him. I was in a session. I was down in Florida. I was in a conference. He was the speaker. And I guess like a little schoolgirl, I wanted to meet him, and I wanted my picture taken with him. And so here's the picture. I ran up, and I asked him to pose with me. So here he is. He's posing with me, and he has no idea who I am. He's just posing, right? Little does he know that I'm in Canada way more famous than he'll ever be, right? That's what you're thinking. But anyway, nevertheless, I'm all excited. I'm posing like a schoolgirl with this picture. But now let me tell you about the message that day, because the day that he spoke there, he was teaching on the book of Job. And Job had the worst day of his life. The book of Job is the worst day of his life. And you know how long that day lasted? 9 months. The worst day of his life was 9 months long, and he lost everything. He lost his house and his barns, and he lost his servants, and he lost his crops, and he lost his animals, and he lost all 10 of his children. That's a pretty bad day. And Rick Warren was teaching on the book of Job and how we respond in the midst of calamity, and how do we respond in the midst of tragedy. And at the end of his message, he got very transparent, and he told a story about his own son. And he told the story of his then 26-year-old son, Matthew, and he says, every day we live with the possibility, because our son has a mental illness, we live every day with the possibility that this might be his last day because he's suicidal. And he says, every day we pray that this won't be his last. Every day we pray that he will not take his life. And we live with that hanging over us every single day of our lives, that our son's last day might be this day. And so he shared this very vulnerable, very transparent story. 1 year, almost to the date, Rick Warren's then 27-year-old son, Matthew, committed suicide. Bought a gun off the internet, shot himself, and it was over. And of course, what do you do in the midst of that? Is you grieve. What do? You engage with God, and what do? You encourage yourself. This is what he did. I mean, they took some time off, and they encouraged themselves in the Lord, and they inquired. And as they inquired with the Lord gave them a plan. And the Lord said, we want you to go back. You wanted them to re-engage with ministry, and want you to go back, and they've changed their focus. And what they want to do is they want to be a hope to those who have family members who have mental illness and are struggling with those sort of things. People that have suicidal members and friends in their family and those sort of things, to bring hope to people who have no hope. And so he is re-engaged on a different level. And he's come back with a vengeance in a positive way. He's gone back into the battle, because life goes on and you have to re-engage. And this is what he said. He said, you will discover that your greatest sorrow in life will become life's greatest message. And that's true for every one of us. Because that which the devil meant for evil, God will turn it around for good. And all things, not all good things, all things work together for good to those that love the Lord and are called according to his purpose. And you know, I know that's hard to understand. And sometimes you won't actually get that picture until we get to the other side. And when we get to heaven and we look back and we go, oh, I get it now. A lot of times we won't actually fully understand it and comprehend it on this side of heaven. But we have to believe that as true as God is in the heaven, that he has our life in his hand, and that he is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, and that he is for us, not against us. And that if we will learn to encourage ourselves in the Lord, to inquire, and then to re-engage life, we can turn our worst day of our life into our best days, because God is still on the throne, and prayer changes things.
Church of the Rock has services every Sunday at 1397 Buffalo Place, and we invite you to join us when you're in the Winnipeg area. If you'd like a booklet to help you understand more about God's gift of forgiveness and reconciliation through Jesus Christ, please contact us, and we'd be happy to send you a free copy of the Book of Hope. Visit our website at www.churchoftherock.ca. Thank you for watching, and God bless you.